So in fight commentary in any sport, be it football, be it basketball, it doesn't matter, tennis, it could even be, you have a division of labor. And I think this is fundamental to understand. When I work with fighters, I always break this down. And I'm a big football, soccer fan. So I always talk about the fact that you're not going to have two goalkeepers on the pitch at the same time. Or if you want to use American football, if you want to use NFL, you're not going to have two quarterbacks on the field at the same time. And if you do, they better not both be lining up under center. Play-by-play is what I do. Play-by-play commentators are John Anik, Mauro Ranallo, Mike Goldberg, Michael Chiavello. It's called play-by-play. In England, you would call it a summarizer. In the United States and in Canada, we call it a color, or we call it an analyst. Those are typically your ex-athletes or your ex-coaches. I break it down like this. Play-by-play, what I do is about the who and the what. What an analyst does, that's the great Nathan Carnage Corbett with me on Lion Fight. That's about the why and the how. Color commentator, an analyst, a summarizer has to go underneath for me. They need to explain to people the motivation behind things. Why are they doing something? How can they improve? How can they defend? How are they looking to finish the fight? It's being super technical on that. Play-by-play for me is about I'm saying and through the teep, and through the lead left hook, or if I'm doing MMA, puts on an inverted heel hook. The color commentator then has to explain technically, breaking down almost like teaching those positions. Again, that's not unique to fighting, that's in all sports. I think when people don't understand that, that's when broadcast can sometimes be a mess. So I stress very much the delineation of the roles, and I think that that's the key to making a clean broadcast. I'm a fight guy. Some people say I'm a boxing guy or I'm an MMA guy. I'm a fight guy. To my knowledge, I believe I'm the only person who commentates MMA, Muay Thai, Lethwei, bare knuckle, submission grappling, and boxing. I might be missing something out of that. I'm a fight guy. Within that realm, I love pulling the nuances. So I'm basically the same me, whether you hear me commentating Muay Thai or you hear me commentating MMA or you hear me commentating boxing. I'm essentially me, but I'm finding the nuances. And I think it's so incredibly important that you're using the right terminology too. Because even within combat sports, maybe a strike is sometimes referred to something differently depending on that sport. So with Muay Thai, I'm really looking at the nuances. I'm fascinated by the more traditional Thai style, a lot more heavy on the lead leg and on the lead hand, as opposed to the Dutch style influence. Then in the United States, because so often people find Muay Thai through their MMA gym and how they're influenced through their MMA striking. As we're seeing combat sports progress, we're starting to see more of a mashup. We're seeing cross-training. We're seeing boxing classes offered in MMA gyms, and we're seeing jiu-jitsu classes offered in Muay Thai gyms. And all of that mashup is changing the style of how people fight, but within that there's still the nuances of footwork, of angles, of the types of strikes and the angles of which they're throwing the strikes that I find fascinating. And I really, for instance, is in commentating Lion Fight Muay Thai, am really trying to hone in as the play-by-play commentator on those nuances. So as a play-by-play commentator, I'm huge on my fighter meetings, and it doesn't matter which combat sport I'm commentating, doesn't matter the promotion, doesn't matter the broadcast network or the streaming outlet, I'm doing my fighter meetings. My fighter meetings are I'm sitting down with every fighter. I don't care if that's the opening prelim, I don't care if it's someone making their pro debut or if that's the main event in a world title fight. I treat every fighter the exact same way. So I'm sitting down with every fighter. It's going to go somewhere about 15 to 20 minutes. We're talking one-on-one. I give them my disclaimer speech that this is just for me and it's for my notes. I'm not going back and forth. I'm not going to say, well, your opponent said this and you said this, or I'm not putting it on social media. As I tell fighters, I want to see the fight through their eyes and I want to see the fight through their opponent's eyes. So as we sit and we talk, first I want to establish a little bit of background, especially fighters who I've never commentated before, want to understand a little bit about how they found their way into that sport, where they came from, and from an athletic standpoint. I'm not looking for the sob story or the human interest story. I'm looking for the athletic story, how they came to that sport. Then I want to talk to them about strategy. I talk to them a lot about how do you think your opponent's going to fight you? What's their strategy? And oftentimes they'll pause because they haven't thought about that. I want to have them assess their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Tell me where the holes are in their opponent's game. Tell me what they have to look out for. I want them to articulate their strategy. And it's so rewarding for me as a commentator. If someone, for instance, said, you know, the key to victory for me is to stay on the outside, throw my teeps, throw my jab, and then they execute that game plan. The reverse of that is if a fighter, for instance, says, I'm going to eat my opponent up in the clinch. The clinch is my key to victory, and they don't clinch once in the entire fight. That tells me that things aren't going right. That's what I look for in a fighter meeting. It's the absolute baseline of everything that I do as a commentator. I love talking to fighters. I adore commentating. It's my favorite thing, but a very close second are the fighter meetings, because I don't just want to be handed a stack of research notes. If I was, I wouldn't look at them anyway. No disrespect to the research producer. I want to understand the fighters as people. I want to understand who they are. I need to have that emotional investment. Make no mistake, I do not care who wins and loses in a fight, but I want to feel emotionally invested to everybody who's fighting on my card, and I develop that through the fighter meeting. So in fighter meetings, it's funny to me in that the better a fighter is, the less likely they are to talk about how they're going to win and dominate. And I understand that's posturing, and posturing comes through fear. You know, it's kind of the running joke that if you get someone who's a 19-year-old pro debuter, they're going to sit back and they're going to be like, yeah, I'm better than my opponent at everything, and he has no chance. You get someone who's a 40-fight veteran and maybe a world champion, a former world champion, they're going to say, you know what, my opponent's great, and if he does A, B, and C, I'm going to lose, so I've got to do D, E, and F. You get those really good tactical breakdowns. But I deal with all types of fighters, all ages, from pro debuters to people who are multiple-time world champions and some of the best fighters in the world, and this is in all combat sports. So I want to tailor the interview to that personality. I'm not pushing, and as I always tell them, I'm not a reporter, I'm a commentator. There's a big difference, so I'm never pushing. So often I'll get fighters who say, you know, I got a wrestling scholarship, and then I got into some trouble, and I was like, I don't need to hear about that. That's none of my business. We're all about the good here, and we're all about the fighting. Sometimes fighters will open up to me. No one's cried on this card. I had someone cry last card. Usually, not last Muay Thai, but or Lion Fight, but the show I did last week. Usually someone will cry, and it's just an emotional release. And they're not even crying out of stress or sadness or nerves. It's just an emotional release of everything that they're feeling. But I have the questions that I want to ask, but I let them control the interview in that I want them to say what they want to say to me. I'm going to channel it a certain way to get my information, but I really want to hear their answers, and I want to see where they are. So often it's not what a fighter tells me, it's how they tell me, the tone that they use, if they're making proper eye contact, if I look at their body language, if they're very closed off, or if they're very open. That gives me a good indication of where their head is, and that usually informs how I think the fight is going to go. I don't want to have preconceived notions, and again, I don't care who wins or loses, but I want to have a good idea of the mindset of the two fighters if they can fulfill their strategy. So I really pride myself on being very responsive. You can find me on social media at Sean Wheelock, SeanWheelock. My kids have really gotten me into Instagram away from Twitter and Facebook, so I love Instagram, and again, I'm very responsive on that. You can find me on all social media platforms except TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. And hit me up. I love to hear from people around the world, and that to me is the greatest thing about combat sports. I've commentated in 26 different countries. I'm a guy from Shawnee, Kansas, and I've commentated in 26 different countries. That's not a reflection on me, that's a reflection on the real great nature and the unifying nature of combat sports. So it's so rewarding to me if I hear somebody from my home state of Kansas, or if I'm hearing somebody in Myanmar, or if I'm hearing from somebody in central Russia. So I love hearing from people on social media, and I will always do my best to respond.
Please like, comment, subscribe, and share.